They said a millionaire would never truly love a woman like her. But when Damien Harden first saw Chelsea Gray, he knew he would burn down the entire world and every gilded cage within it, just to prove them all wrong. The charity gala sparkled with 1,000 diamonds and twice as many well-practiced lies. The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan was a heavy, cloying mixture of expensive French perfume, the floral scent of towering lily arrangements, and the faint, yeasty aroma of vintage champagne. To Damien Harden, it was the familiar smell of his gilded prison. He stood frozen in the arched doorway, his tuxedo feeling like a straitjacket. He was supposed to be schmoozing, shaking hands, perpetuating the family legacy with a charming smile that never reached his eyes. Instead, his world had narrowed to a single point of light in the overwhelming glare, a sudden anchor in a sea of glittering meaninglessness. Among the sea of society's finest predators dressed as philanthropists, one woman captured his entire soul with a single, unintentional glance. She stood near the silent auction table, a quiet island in a churning ocean of silk and ambition. He watched as she traced the edge of a silver frame with one finger, her focus entirely on the art, completely oblivious to the swirling power dynamics around her. She was like a wildflower blooming in a field of plastic roses, her simple navy dress more elegant in its honest beauty than all the designer gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Its lines were clean, its fabric humble, yet on her it looked like couture. Her natural grace, the way she held herself with an artist's quiet intensity, made every other woman in the room look like actresses overplaying their roles, desperate for an audience she commanded without even trying. Chelsea Gray had no business being at the Harden Foundation's annual charity circus. The very air felt foreign to her, a different atmospheric pressure from the world she knew. She felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, appraising, dismissing, and had to consciously stop herself from fidgeting with the simple clutch in her hands. She was there only because Professor Martinez, her mentor at the art college, had practically dragged her, hissing reassurances in her ear. He insisted that someone important, a major patron, wanted to see her paintings, someone who might change the trajectory of her struggling artist's life forever. As a woman juggling 3 jobs to pay for art school, waitressing until 2 a.m., stocking shelves at an art supply store at dawn, and walking dogs in the afternoon, she felt as out of place among the wealthy elite as a sparrow in a cage of golden peacocks. "Excuse me," a voice like warm honey over broken glass said from just behind her, sending a jolt of pure electricity racing down her spine in ways that made no logical sense. The sound was low, intimate, and meant only for her, cutting through the din of the party like a perfectly tuned instrument. These pieces, the raw emotion in them is staggering. Are you the artist behind this extraordinary work? Chelsea turned, her heart lodging itself in her throat. Oh God, he's talking to me. Damien Harden is talking to me. Don't sound like a terrified mouse, Chelsea, just breathe. She found herself drowning in the most beautiful brown eyes she had ever seen. Eyes that belonged to a man so impossibly handsome he should have been illegal in at least 47 states. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a tuxedo that was clearly bespoke, fitting him in a way that spoke of quiet, effortless power. He carried himself with the kind of confident presence that suggested he had never been told no in his entire privileged life, yet there was something else in his expression, something vulnerable and exposed as he looked at her art, that stopped her heart cold. Genuine wonder, a raw, unguarded admiration, as if her art, the canvases she'd poured her anxieties, her hopes and her loneliness into, had reached directly into his chest and rearranged something vital. "Yes, These are mine," she managed, her voice a little shaky but clear. She was suddenly, painfully hyper-aware of everything from her discount dress that she'd bought on final sale, to her nervous, thundering heartbeat, to the faint smudge of Prussian blue paint still embedded under her fingernails from her morning shift. "I'm Damien Harden," he said, extending a hand that could have belonged to a pianist or a surgeon. Elegant, strong, with calluses that suggested he actually worked despite his obvious wealth. His grip was warm and firm, a shock of human connection in the cold, sterile room. And these paintings are absolutely devastating. This one. He gestured to a canvas, showing a woman's silhouette against a storm-torn sky, rendered in violent, textured slashes of cerulean and charcoal. The impasto technique you used, it's like the pain has a physical texture. It's not just a picture of a storm, it is the storm. It doesn't just speak to the soul, it grabs you by the throat and forces you to feel things you thought you'd buried deep. Chelsea's world tilted sideways on its axis. This was the Damien Harden, the millionaire heir she'd read about in newspapers, the untouchable prince whose family owned half the city and the other half owed them favors. He was supposed to be arrogant, entitled, surrounded by supermodels, and completely unreachable for someone like her. Instead, he was looking at her paintings like they were religious artifacts, like they contained truths he'd been searching for his entire life. He was seeing the technique, the choices, the soul of the work, not just the surface. "You really see that in them," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, a genuine awe in her tone. "Most people just comment on the colors or ask if it would match their sofa." A genuine, warm laugh escaped him, and it transformed his handsome face into something breathtakingly real. "How could they not see it?" he countered, his gaze intense, turning from the canvas to her, truly seeing her for the first time. "I don't just see it, I feel it burning in my chest. Art this powerful doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from a heart that has been shattered and rebuilt, from a soul that has loved so deeply it left scars, from a spirit that has survived things that would destroy weaker people." "Who are you?" Their conversation flowed like music, like poetry, like two instruments finally finding their perfect harmony after years of playing solo. He asked her about her process, her inspiration, the stories behind each piece. She found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about the grief that fueled the storm painting, about the flicker of hope in another piece showing a single sprout pushing through cracked pavement. Chelsea forgot about the intimidating crowd, forgot about feeling like an imposter, forgot about everything except the man standing before her who saw her, truly saw her, not as a charity case or a struggling student, but as an artist, a dreamer, a woman worth knowing. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" Damien asked, as the evening dissolved into magic around them, his voice carrying a vulnerability that seemed impossible for someone of his stature. "I have to know the woman who creates such beauty." I work tomorrow night. I'm a waitress at Romano's downtown," Chelsea admitted, bracing herself for the moment his interest would evaporate like morning mist, for the polite dismissal and the return to his gilded world. Instead, his smile blazed brighter than every chandelier in the ballroom. "Then I will have dinner at Romano's. It's my new favorite restaurant. What time should I make a reservation to fall in love with you over chicken parmesan?" What followed was the most beautiful, determined siege in the history of romance. Damien appeared at Romano's every single night Chelsea worked. He wasn't there for the food. He was there for the stolen moments between her tables, for the 5-minute breaks when they could talk. He claimed table 12 like it was his personal kingdom, always with a book he never opened, his eyes following her every move. He ordered the same chicken parmesan that he probably couldn't even taste, and spent hours talking with Chelsea about art, dreams, and the kind of future that seemed impossible, until suddenly it was the only future that mattered. "This is insane," her roommate Lisa warned her one night as she watched Chelsea carefully apply a touch of mascara before her shift, something she never used to do. "He's Damien Harden. His family owns kingdoms. You serve spaghetti for tips. This fairy tale doesn't have a happy ending for girls like us." but Chelsea was already drowning too deep to hear reason. When Damien looked at her, she didn't feel like a struggling artist juggling 3 jobs and student loans. She felt like the center of the universe, like the answer to questions he'd never known how to ask. When he talked about her art, his eyes blazed with a genuine reverence that fueled her own passion. When he held her hand across that small, checkered tablecloth at Romano's, it felt like coming home to a place that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. The Harden family's reaction was swift and brutal as a winter storm. "Absolutely not," Richard Harden declared during a confrontation that shook the delicate crystal in their estate's cavernous dining room. "You will not humiliate this family by marrying some nobody from the gutter." "Her name is Chelsea Gray," Damien replied with a voice like steel wrapped in silk, his jaw set in the stubborn line that had been getting him in trouble since childhood. "And she's the woman who's going to be my wife, with or without your blessing. I suggest you get used to the idea." "Over our dead bodies," Patricia Harden hissed, her diamond necklace glittering like ice around a throat that had never known want. "We have sacrificed too much, worked too hard, built this family's reputation over generations. We will not watch you destroy it all for some little gold digger who sees dollar signs when she looks at you." "She's not a gold digger. She's brilliant, talented, kind, and she loves me for who I am when I'm not wearing a suit that costs more than her monthly rent. A concept I imagine is foreign to you." Love. James Harden, his uncle, laughed with the cruelty that only comes from inherited power. "You think that's love? She's playing the long game, nephew. Girls from her background always are. They're patient, they're clever, and they're very, very good at making wealthy men feel seen." "You don't know her," Damien said, rising from his chair with the controlled fury of a man pushed past his breaking point. "You don't know anything about her heart, her dreams, her incredible strength. You judge her because she wasn't born into money, but that's exactly why she's perfect for me. She loves me, not my trust fund. She sees my soul, not my net worth." "If you marry that girl," Richard said with the finality of a death sentence, "don't expect this family to clean up the mess when she takes half of everything you own and disappears with someone younger and more exciting." But Damien had already made his choice with the certainty of a man who had finally found his true north. That night, he found Chelsea on the fire escape of her cramped apartment, staring at the city lights through tears that broke his heart into 1,000,000 sharp pieces. "They hate me," she whispered, as he climbed up to sit beside her on the rusty metal, the city's noise a distant hum. "Your family, your world, everyone who matters to you, they think I'm some kind of predator trying to trap you." "I don't care what they think," Damien said with a ferocity that surprised them both. He took her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "Chelsea, look at me. Look into my eyes and see the truth. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. You are not trying to trap me. You have set me free from a cage I didn't even know I was living in. Before you, I was just sleepwalking through an existence someone else had designed for me. Now, every moment feels like a gift because I get to spend it choosing you. But they'll never accept me. They'll make our lives a war zone. Then we'll build our own country," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll create something so beautiful, so strong, so full of real love that their hatred can't even reach us." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Chelsea's entire world stopped spinning on its axis as he opened it. "Marry me, Chelsea Gray. Marry me, and let's prove to every doubter, every critic, every person who said we couldn't work, that real love doesn't just conquer all. It makes everything else irrelevant." The diamond ring caught the distant starlight like captured fire, but it was nothing compared to the light blazing in Damien's eyes as he waited for the answer that would determine both their futures. "Yes," she breathed through tears that tasted like joy and terror and the most beautiful kind of madness. "Yes, yes, forever and always yes." Their engagement announcement hit society pages like a scandal-wrapped grenade. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire heir to marry unknown waitress," and "Harden fortune at risk as son chooses heart over heritage." Television gossip shows dissected their relationship like vultures picking at roadkill. Society photographers hunted them like prey, and social media exploded with opinions about their doomed romance. The family tried everything short of kidnapping to stop the wedding. Bribes that could have bought small countries, threats that made Chelsea's hands shake, emotional manipulation that would have impressed professional torturers. But Damien stood like an immovable mountain, protecting Chelsea from the storm while planning the wedding that would seal their defiance. On their wedding day, as Chelsea walked down the aisle of the small, sun-drenched church they had chosen instead of the cold cathedral his family demanded, Damien felt his heart stop and restart in a completely new rhythm. She was radiant in her simple white dress, her grandmother's pearl necklace her only jewelry, her smile brighter than every diamond in his mother's collection. "You looked like every dream I never dared to have," he whispered when she reached him at the altar, his voice choked with emotion. "And you look like my forever," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tears of pure joy streaming down her face as she placed her hand in his. The pastor's words seemed to echo with prophecy. "Do you, Damien, take Chelsea to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, forsaking all others till death do you part?" "I do," Damien said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church, a promise and a declaration. "Forever, completely, without reservation, I do." When they kissed as husband and wife, sealing promises that felt more sacred than any contract, the small crowd of friends erupted in celebration. But all Chelsea could hear was the sound of her own heart singing the first notes of forever. Their honeymoon in Paris was pure enchantment. They walked hand in hand along the Seine like lovers in a classic movie, getting lost in the winding streets of Montmartre. They visited art galleries where Damien bought Chelsea's favorite pieces without looking at price tags, simply because he loved the way her eyes lit up when she looked at them. They made love with the desperate, joyous passion of two people who had fought the entire world to be together and had won. "Promise me something," Chelsea said one night as they lay on their hotel balcony, wrapped in a sheet, watching the Eiffel Tower sparkle like a cascade of captured stars. "Anything in this world or the next," Damien replied, his lips brushing her bare shoulder. "Promise me that no matter what anyone says, no matter how hard they try to tear us apart, we'll never let them win. Promise me our love will always be our true north, stronger than their hatred." Damien rolled over to face her, his expression serious and tender in the moonlight that made them both look like marble statues of perfect lovers. "Chelsea Harden, I promise you that nothing and no one will ever come between us. What we have isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. It's the kind of love that changes people, that inspires songs, that proves miracles are real. The whole world can unite against us and they'll fail, because our love isn't just unbreakable, it's unstoppable." "Mrs. Chelsea Harden," she said dreamily, testing her new identity against his lips. "I love how that sounds. Get used to it, beautiful. You're stuck with me for the next 70 years, and even then I'm not letting go." But as they made promises under the Parisian stars, neither of them knew that back home someone was already studying their wedding photos with the calculating eyes of a predator, someone who believed that everything Damien had should rightfully belong to her, and who was willing to wait as long as it took to claim what she considered hers. Chapter 2. Love Conquers All. When Chelsea Harden walked into their dream mansion as a newlywed, she believed she was walking into forever. And for 3 beautiful years, forever felt absolutely, perfectly real. The keys to their new home trembled in Chelsea's hands as Damien swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the mansion he had designed with her dreams in mind. It wasn't just a house, it was a promise cast in stone and glass. Every room whispered promises of the future they would build together, every detail chosen to make her feel like the queen she was in his eyes, from the north-facing art studio with perfect, consistent light to the garden filled with the wildflowers she loved. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harden," he murmured against her ear, his voice thick with emotion as he set her down gently in the grand foyer, its marble floor cool beneath her feet. "It's beyond perfect," Chelsea breathed, her eyes drinking in the soaring ceilings, the way afternoon light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid gold. She spun in a slow circle, a laugh bubbling up from her chest. "I can't believe this is real. I can't believe we're real." "Believe it, beautiful," he said, pulling her back into his arms and kissing her deeply. "This is our beginning, not our fairy tale. This is our life." Their first year of marriage was pure magic wrapped in everyday moments that felt extraordinary simply because they were living them together. Damien would leave love notes hidden in Chelsea's art supplies, little folded pieces of paper tucked into jars of brushes, telling her how her latest painting had moved him to tears. One night he came into her studio at 3 a.m. to find her asleep on the sofa, a half-finished canvas on the easel. He gently covered her with a blanket and simply sat in a chair, watching her sleep until the sun came up, unwilling to disturb the creator in her sanctuary. In return, Chelsea would surprise him with candlelit dinners in their garden, wearing the emerald necklace he'd given her, not because it was expensive, but because he said it matched her eyes when she laughed. They built a life not just of grand gestures, but of quiet intimacies. The way he'd bring her coffee in the studio when she'd been painting for hours, the way she'd read the business section of the paper aloud to him on lazy Sunday mornings while they lay tangled in the sheets. Every morning Damien woke before dawn just to watch his wife sleep, marveling at how peaceful she looked, how her dark hair spread across his pillow like spilled silk. It became his private ritual, a moment of gratitude before the world intruded. Every evening, Chelsea waited by the front window for his car to turn into their driveway, her heart racing with the same excitement she'd felt on their very first date. Soon after their first anniversary, as they danced in their living room to the same song from their wedding, Chelsea felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with romance. She paused, laying her head against his chest, her heart pounding with a new, thrilling kind of hope. "Damien," she whispered against his shirt, her breath catching. I think I might be pregnant." He stopped dancing so abruptly that she stumbled, then caught her face in his hands with a reverence that took her breath away, his eyes searching hers, wide with disbelief and dawning joy. "Are you serious?" "Chelsea, are you telling me we're going to have a baby, our baby? I'm late, and I've been feeling strange, and—" She laughed through sudden, happy tears, her hands coming to rest over his on her cheeks. "I think our love story is about to get a new chapter." Damien's response was to let out a whoop of pure joy, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around their living room. He kissed her with such passionate happiness that they both ended up crying and laughing at the same time, two souls overflowing with a love that was now, miraculously, creating new life. The pregnancy test confirmed what their hearts already knew. When those two pink lines appeared, they both stared at the small plastic stick like it contained all the secrets of the universe, a sacred artifact. "Hello, little miracle," Damien whispered, kneeling to press a tender kiss to Chelsea's still flat stomach. "This is your daddy, and I already love you more than I knew was possible." "And this is your mama," Chelsea added, her hand covering his, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "And you are the most wanted baby in the history of the world." The art world began taking serious notice of Chelsea's work during their second year of marriage. Her first solo exhibition sold every single painting on opening night, with critics praising her devastating emotional honesty and supernatural to capture the human heart in brushstrokes. But the review that mattered most came from her husband, who stood in the middle of the crowded gallery with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, ignoring the curious stares. "That's my wife," he told everyone within hearing distance, his voice cracking with pride. "That brilliant, incredible woman is my wife, and she's just getting started." When Christopher James Harden was born on a snowy February morning after 12 hours of labor, both parents fell completely, irrevocably in love with the tiny miracle they had created together. He weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces, had his father's warm brown eyes, and possessed the kind of perfect features that made nurses stop their work just to admire him. "He's absolutely perfect," Chelsea whispered, exhausted but euphoric, cradling their son against her chest while Damien sat beside them on the hospital bed, his finger gently stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Look at what we made," Damien said in wonder, his voice thick with emotions he didn't have names for. "Look at this perfect little person who exists because we loved each other so much." "Christopher James Harden," Chelsea tested their son's name softly. "Our little Chris. Do you think he knows how much he's loved?" "He'll know every day of his life," Damien promised, his gaze fierce and protective. "He'll never doubt for 1 second that he was wanted, planned for, celebrated before he was even born." Bringing Chris home transformed their mansion from a house into something sacred. The grand, quiet spaces were now filled with coos and laughter. Chelsea would nurse their son in the rocking chair by the nursery window, looking out at the gardens they had planted together, feeling like the most blessed woman who had ever lived. Damien proved to be a natural father, changing diapers at 3 in the morning without complaint, walking the floors with a fussy Chris slung over his shoulder, singing off-key lullabies in his deep voice that seemed to calm their son instantly. "I never knew I could love anything this much," he confessed one night as they stood together, watching Chris sleep in his crib, the moonlight striping the floor. "Now you know how I feel about you," Chelsea replied, taking his hand. "And now you know how I feel about both of you." When Chris was 18 months old and toddling around their home like he owned it, they began talking about expanding their family. Not because Chris wasn't enough, but because their love felt infinite, capable of embracing as many children as they were blessed to have. "I want a house full of babies, full of laughter and tiny fingerprints on the windows," Chelsea admitted, as they watched Chris play with his building blocks on their living room carpet. "Then a house full of babies we'll have," Damien agreed without hesitation, his eyes alight with the same dream. "As many as you want, whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Their second pregnancy happened quickly, as if the universe approved of their decision. Derek William Harden was born on a beautiful spring morning when Chris was 2 years old and the cherry blossoms in their garden were in full bloom. If Chris had been a miracle, Derek was proof that miracles could happen twice. He had Chelsea's delicate features, Damien's stubborn chin, and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met him fall in love instantly. "2 sons," Damien said, his voice heavy with emotion as he held his newest child, marveling at the tiny, perfect fingers wrapped around his own. 2 perfect, beautiful sons. How did I get so lucky? "Our family is growing," Chelsea said happily, watching 2-year-old Chris try to gently pat his baby brother's head. "And our love just keeps getting bigger." By their 5th wedding anniversary, their house rang with the sound of children's laughter. 4-year-old Chris was serious and thoughtful, already showing signs of his father's natural leadership. 2-year-old Derek was sunshine personified, laughing at everything and charming everyone he met. 5 years, Damien said on their anniversary morning, bringing Chelsea breakfast in bed while the boys played quietly in the next room. 5 years of proving every single doubter spectacularly wrong. 5 years of the greatest love story ever told, Chelsea agreed, accepting the orange juice he offered. And the best part is, we're just getting started. Their life was perfect in ways that made other couples envious. They had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that felt absolutely unshakable. But 3 states away, someone was finally making the phone call she had been planning for 5 long years. Someone who believed it was time to claim what should have always been hers. Chapter 3. Growing Paradise. By their 5th wedding anniversary, Chelsea Harden thought they had built something unbreakable. But she didn't know that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who smile while they sharpen their knives. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom windows as Chelsea stirred awake on their 5th wedding anniversary, her hand instinctively moving to rest on Damien's chest, where his heart beat steady and strong. At 26, she felt like she was living in a dream that kept getting more beautiful with each passing day. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Harden," Damien murmured against her neck, his arm tightening around her waist with the same possessive tenderness he'd shown since their wedding day. "5 years," Chelsea whispered, turning in his arms with a smile that could have powered the entire city. 5 incredible, perfect years. "And we're just getting started," he replied, his eyes holding the same deep, unwavering love that had captured her heart at that charity gala so long ago. Their kiss was interrupted by the thunder of small feet racing down the hallway, followed by their bedroom door bursting open with the force that only excited children could generate. "Mama! Daddy!" 4-year-old Chris launched himself onto their bed with the fearless abandon of a child who had never known anything but love and security. "Can we make pancakes for your anniversary breakfast?" 2-year-old Derek followed his big brother's lead, climbing up beside them with his stuffed elephant clutched in his chubby hands. "Pancakes," he agreed enthusiastically, clapping his small hands together. "Anniversary pancakes sound perfect," Damien laughed, scooping both boys into a group hug that somehow managed to include Chelsea as well. "But first, Mama and Daddy want to tell you something special." "Are we going on vacation?" Chris asked, hopefully. He'd been talking about wanting to see the ocean ever since his friend Tommy had come back from the beach with shells and stories. "Even better," Chelsea said, her heart racing with the joy of sharing news they had been hoping for. She shared a look with Damien, a silent communication of their shared dream. "How would you boys feel about having a baby brother or sister?" Chris's face lit up like the 4th of July. "Really? A real baby that would live here with us?" "We're going to try our very best to give you one," Damien promised, his voice thick with emotion. "What do you think about that?" "I think," Chris said with the seriousness that only a 4-year-old could manage, "that I would teach them everything I know about building blocks and reading books." "Baby!" Derek clapped his hands together, not fully understanding but caught up in the excitement anyway. When Chelsea missed her period in late May, they both held their breath with a familiar, joyous hope. The pregnancy test, laid carefully on the bathroom counter, confirmed what their hearts already suspected. Their family would be growing once again. "Third time's the charm," Damien said, spinning her around their bedroom while she laughed with pure joy, a sound that echoed through their happy home. "Maybe this time we'll get our little princess," Chelsea said, her hands already moving protectively to her stomach as she leaned back against him. "A little girl with your eyes." "Boy or girl," he whispered, kissing her temple. "As long as they have your heart, this baby is going to be the most loved child in the world." Over the following months of summer, their house buzzed with happy, secret anticipation. Chelsea threw herself into creating the perfect environment for their 3rd child, painting what would become the nursery in soft yellows and greens, since they wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. The scent of turpentine and fresh paint mingled with the sounds of her son's laughter, creating a symphony of domestic bliss that felt like a living work of art. Her art career continued to flourish in ways that amazed everyone who knew her story. Galleries in major cities were requesting her work, Collectors were paying premium prices for her paintings, and art critics were calling her one of the most authentic voices in contemporary art. "I'm so proud of you," Damien told her one evening as they walked through her latest exhibition together, watching strangers connect emotionally with the joy and love she captured on canvas. "You're not just talented, beautiful, you're extraordinary. You're changing how people think about family, about happiness, about what really matters in life." "I'm just painting what I see," Chelsea replied, leaning into his warmth as they stood before a large portrait of him reading to their two boys. "I'm painting our life, our love, our children. I'm painting proof that fairy tales can come true." Their home had become a sanctuary that friends and neighbors envied. The mansion felt alive with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that made visitors comment on the positive energy radiating from every room. Chris was growing into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved books, building elaborate structures with his blocks, and helping his mother in the garden. He had inherited his father's natural leadership qualities and his mother's artistic sensitivity, often creating surprisingly sophisticated drawings that Damien insisted on framing and displaying in his office. 2-year-old Derek was pure sunshine in human form, charming everyone he met with his infectious laughter and sweet disposition. He was already showing signs of artistic talent, finger-painting masterpieces on giant sheets of paper that Chelsea treasured as much as any gallery piece, hanging them in a special gallery in the hallway. "We make beautiful children," Damien observed one evening, as they watched the boys play together in their living room, constructing an elaborate fort from couch cushions and blankets. "We make a beautiful life," Chelsea corrected, her heart so full of contentment it felt like it might overflow with happiness. Their announcement to Chris and Derek was met with excited cheers and immediate plans for how they would help care for their new sibling. "I'm going to teach the baby how to build the tallest towers," Chris declared with 4-year-old seriousness. "I'm going to share my elephant," Derek added, hugging his favorite stuffed animal tightly. The early months of pregnancy were blissful. Chelsea experienced only mild morning sickness. Her energy remained high, and she glowed with the radiant happiness that had marked her previous pregnancies. She continued painting, though now her canvases showed expectant mothers, growing families, and the quiet anticipation of new life. "You're painting our future again," Damien observed one day, standing behind her easel as she worked on a piece showing a woman with 2 young boys, all of them looking toward a nursery door with expressions of loving anticipation. "I'm painting hope," Chelsea replied, leaning back into his embrace. "I'm painting what love looks like when it grows into something even more beautiful." As summer turned to autumn and Chelsea's pregnancy began to show, their family felt complete in a way it never had before. The boys were excited about their coming sibling. Damien was more attentive and loving than ever, and Chelsea felt like she was living proof that dreams really could come true. But as they planned for their growing family and celebrated 5 years of marriage that had overcome every obstacle, neither of them knew that the storm was already brewing. Someone had been watching their happiness for 5 long years, growing more resentful with each glimpse of their joy. Someone who believed that everything Damien had should rightfully belong to her. Someone who was about to make a phone call that would begin the systematic destruction of everything they had built together, and that phone call was coming tomorrow. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Arrival. Evil rarely announces itself with fanfare. It usually arrives with a smile, designer luggage, and a perfectly crafted story about needing help. The black sedan pulled into the circular driveway of the Harden mansion on a crisp September morning, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. Chelsea felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine as she watched from the living room window. At 3 months pregnant, her maternal instincts had become razor-sharp, and something about this moment felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate, like a single, discordant note in a perfect symphony. She was folding tiny baby clothes, the soft cotton a comfort in her hands. while 4-year-old Chris built elaborate towers with his blocks, and 2-year-old Derek helped by occasionally knocking them down with gleeful laughter. The domestic scene was perfect, peaceful, exactly the kind of moment she would paint if she wanted to capture pure happiness on canvas. "She's here," Damien called from the foyer, and Chelsea heard genuine excitement in his voice, the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for family moments or business victories. "Sabrina's finally here." Chelsea forced herself to smile as she stood, one hand instinctively moving to her still small bump where their third child grew, as if sensing her tension. When Damien had told her about his cousin's phone call, the sob story of a bad breakup, a need for a fresh start, a plea to stay for just a little while, his immediate instinct to help family was something she had always loved about him. She had tried to feel welcoming, but something about the timing felt calculated, suspicious in ways that made her protective instincts scream warnings. "Just be yourself, beautiful," Damien had assured her the night before when she'd voiced her concerns. "Sabrina will love you once she gets to know you. Family is family, and she's been through a rough time." But as Sabrina Monroe stepped through their front door like she was walking onto a movie set, Chelsea's every instinct told her this was not family. This was an invasion. Sabrina was breathtaking in the way that magazine covers and red carpets demanded, tall, willowy, with platinum blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold and green eyes that seemed to catalogue and evaluate everything at once. Her designer clothes, a chic trench coat over a silk blouse, fit like they'd been painted on. Her makeup was flawless despite hours of travel, and she moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. "Damien," she exclaimed, her voice a cultivated purr, as she launched herself into his arms with the familiarity of shared blood and childhood memories. "Look at you!" Still as devastatingly handsome as ever, just like I always remembered. "Sabrina, you look incredible," Damien replied warmly, hugging his cousin with a genuine affection that made Chelsea's stomach twist uncomfortably. "You haven't aged a day since I last saw you." "Flatterer," Sabrina laughed, but her eyes were already moving past Damien to take inventory of everything around her, the expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture, the obvious wealth that surrounded them like armor. Her gaze was sharp, appraising. "Chelsea, come meet Sabrina," Damien said, beckoning his wife forward with a pride that usually made her heart sing but now felt strangely hollow. Chelsea approached slowly, her slight pregnancy bump making her feel vulnerable and somehow matronly compared to Sabrina's elegant, predatory perfection. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Sabrina. Damien has told me wonderful stories about your childhood together." Sabrina's green eyes swept over Chelsea with the precision of a medical scanner, taking in everything from her simple maternity dress to her barely there bump to the children's toys scattered across the expensive Persian rug. Her smile was magazine perfect, but it held all the warmth of winter moonlight. "So you're the famous Chelsea," Sabrina said, her voice honey-sweet with undertones that felt sharp as broken glass. "The woman who captured our Damien's heart so completely. And congratulations. I heard the wonderful news. When is the baby due?" "Thank you." "In February," Chelsea replied, her hand moving protectively over her stomach. "We're very excited." "How wonderful," Sabrina cooed. But something in her expression suggested she found the pregnancy more inconvenient than wonderful. "And these must be the boys I've heard so much about." Chris and Derek had approached cautiously, Chris with the serious expression he wore when meeting new people, Derek hiding slightly behind his older brother while clutching his stuffed elephant. "Hello, boys," Sabrina said, kneeling down to their level with a practiced charm that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "My goodness, Chris, you look exactly like your father did when he was your age. Strong, hardened genes." "Are you staying in our house?" Chris asked, with the directness that only a 4-year-old could manage. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," Sabrina replied smoothly, her hand briefly touching Chris's cheek in a gesture that made Chelsea want to step between them. I'm starting my graduate program at the university nearby, and your daddy is being wonderfully kind by letting me stay here until I find my own place. Where will you sleep? Derek wanted to know, his 2-year-old curiosity overcoming his shyness. In the guest wing, Damien answered quickly, lifting Derek into his arms. Sabrina will have her own space, complete privacy. We want her to feel at home here. As they gave Sabrina the tour of the mansion, Chelsea watched how Damien's cousin absorbed every detail. The original artwork, the custom furniture, the family photos that chronicled their happiness. Sabrina's compliments flowed like water, perfectly timed and beautifully delivered, but Chelsea caught something calculating in her expression when she thought no one was watching. This house is absolutely stunning, Sabrina gushed as they showed her the main living areas, her manicured fingers trailing along expensive surfaces with obvious appreciation. Chelsea, you have such interesting taste. Everything is so wonderfully domestic. The way she said domestic made it sound like a limitation rather than a compliment, though her tone remained sweet as artificial sugar. Thank you, Chelsea replied carefully, noting how Sabrina's gaze lingered on the Monet in the dining room, the crystal chandelier in the foyer, the way wealth whispered from every corner of their home. Of course, Sabrina agreed with that perfect smile. Creating a warm family environment is so important when you have children. Though I imagine it must be challenging, balancing motherhood with your art career. How on earth do you manage it all? The question sounded supportive, but it carried implications that Chelsea was struggling, that she was somehow failing to balance her responsibilities adequately. I'm very fortunate to have such a supportive husband, Chelsea said firmly, her gaze meeting Damien's. Damien makes sure I have everything I need to pursue my art while being the mother I want to be. How lovely, Sabrina murmured, but her eyes were calculating something that made Chelsea's skin crawl. During dinner that first night, Sabrina regaled them with stories of her sophisticated life in New York, her graduate program in art history at Columbia, her connections in the cultural elite, her glamorous friends who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. She was witty, charming, and effortlessly elegant, making Chelsea feel suddenly provincial despite her own success. You know, Sabrina said as they finished dessert, her wineglass held with the casual grace of someone accustomed to the finest things. I was so surprised when I heard Damien had gotten married. In our family, we always assumed he'd end up with someone from our world, someone who understood the social expectations that come with the Harden name. The words hung in the air like poison gas, sweet-smelling, but deadly. Chelsea is my world, Damien said firmly, his hand finding his wife's across the table with protective warmth. She's brought more authenticity and joy to this family than any socialite ever could. Oh, I didn't mean anything negative, Sabrina backtracked quickly, her laugh tinkling like expensive crystal. I just meant that it must have been quite an adjustment for you, Chelsea, coming from such a different background. It takes a special kind of woman to adapt to this lifestyle so successfully. Each word was a small knife, perfectly sharpened and precisely placed. Sabrina was reminding everyone at the table that Chelsea was an outsider, someone who had infiltrated rather than belonged. I never felt the need to adapt, Chelsea replied quietly, her voice steady, despite the hurt blooming in her chest. Damien married me for who I am, not for a version of me that would fit into a mold. Of course he did, Sabrina agreed with that razor-sharp smile. True love is so beautiful, isn't it? So pure and uncomplicated, but the way she said it made love sound naive, temporary, foolish. Over the following days, Sabrina settled into their home with disturbing ease, like a parasite that had found the perfect host. She was the ideal houseguest, helpful with the children, complimentary about Chelsea's cooking, interested in Damien's business ventures. But Chelsea began noticing things that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Sabrina had a gift for inserting herself into family moments with surgical precision. When Chelsea was reading bedtime stories to the boys, Sabrina would appear with suggestions for more educational books from her curriculum. When Chelsea was working on her art, Sabrina would make subtle comments about more contemporary techniques she'd studied. "I hope you don't mind me making suggestions," Sabrina would say with false humility. "I've just been exposed to so many different approaches through my graduate work, and I hate to see someone struggle when I might be able to help." The problem was, Chelsea hadn't been struggling, but Sabrina's constant, helpful suggestions made her doubt herself in ways that felt toxic and undermining. Worse still, Sabrina had begun having long, private conversations with Damien about business matters, family issues, topics that Chelsea supposedly lacked the background knowledge to contribute to. Chelsea would find them in Damien's study, heads bent over financial reports, talking in voices that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. "Just boring family trust issues," Damien would explain. "Sabrina's helping me navigate some legal matters." "I don't want to burden you with all this tedious business nonsense," Sabrina would add apologetically, but her eyes would sparkle with satisfaction at being included in matters that excluded Chelsea. 2 weeks into Sabrina's stay, Chelsea began experiencing complications with her pregnancy. Nothing serious, her doctor assured her, but enough to require reduced stress. Instead of the loving care she expected from her husband, she found herself increasingly isolated while Sabrina stepped in to help with household management. "Don't worry about anything," Sabrina told her with false concern, bringing her a tray in bed. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly while you rest. The boys adore me, and Damien needs someone who understands the pressures he's under." As Chelsea rested, listening to Sabrina's laughter echoing through the house that had once been her sanctuary, she realized with growing horror that she was being systematically replaced in her own life. And the most terrifying part was that her husband seemed grateful for Sabrina's presence rather than protective of his wife's position in their family. Chapter 5. The Poison Spreads. It took 4 months for Sabrina to plant enough poison in Damien's mind to make him question everything he had once believed about love, and one devastating dinner party to show Chelsea exactly how much power a manipulative woman could wield. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper with embossed gold lettering addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Damien Harden in elegant script that made Chelsea's hands shake as she read it. It was early January, and after 5 years of complete, deafening silence, Patricia Harden was suddenly inviting them to her annual winter charity gala. "Damien!" Chelsea called, her 8-month pregnant belly making it difficult to move quickly as she searched for her husband. She found him in his study with Sabrina, their heads bent close together over legal documents that had somehow become their daily ritual. The scene had become painfully familiar. "Look at this," Chelsea said breathlessly, holding up the invitation while trying to ignore how intimate their positioning looked, how quickly they shifted apart when she entered. "Your Aunt Patricia invited us to her charity gala. After 5 years of nothing, they want us there." Damien looked up from his papers, and Chelsea was struck by how different his expression seemed lately. More distant, more analytical, as if he were constantly measuring her against some invisible standard and finding her lacking. "That's wonderful news," he said, but his voice held none of the excitement she had expected. "Sabrina's been working on rebuilding relationships between me and the family. It looks like her diplomatic efforts are finally paying off." "I told them you'd both matured considerably since the wedding," Sabrina added, with that perfect smile that never seemed to reach her calculating eyes. "Especially you, Chelsea. I mentioned how much you've grown as a wife and mother, how you're finally learning to understand the responsibilities that come with the Harden name." The words hit Chelsea like carefully aimed arrows. Finally learning implied she had been ignorant before, that she was still a work in progress rather than a woman who had successfully managed their household and family for 5 years. "What should I wear?" Chelsea asked, trying to push down her hurt feelings while Damien nodded approvingly at Sabrina's comments, seemingly oblivious to the insult. "Something appropriate for your condition," Damien replied absently, already turning back to his papers. Sabrina understands what's expected at these family events. She can help you choose something suitable. Chelsea felt like she'd been slapped. Since when did she need help choosing her own clothes? Since when did Damien think she didn't understand how to dress appropriately? But Sabrina was already standing, her face bright with a helpful enthusiasm that felt more threatening than supportive. "I'd absolutely love to help," Sabrina said sweetly. "Shopping for formal maternity wear can be so challenging. We'll find you something that's both elegant and practical." The shopping expedition was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as female bonding. Sabrina guided Chelsea to expensive but stuffy boutiques that specialized in mature fashion for established mothers, steering her away from anything that might be considered youthful, fashionable, or attention-grabbing. "At this stage of pregnancy, comfort should be your priority," Sabrina explained, as she held up a shapeless black dress that would have been appropriate for someone attending a funeral. "With the baby due in just a few weeks, you want to look dignified and maternal, not like you're trying to compete with younger women." "Compete?" Chelsea repeated, confused by the implication. "Well, you know how these family events can be. Lots of beautiful young socialites who love to make pregnant wives feel less attractive. Better to project confidence and maturity than try to keep up with girls who don't have your responsibilities." Every dress Sabrina suggested was designed to hide Chelsea's figure, minimize her youth, and project an image of matronly respectability. When Chelsea tried on a beautiful emerald maternity gown that complemented her eyes and showed her pregnancy as the beautiful thing it was, Sabrina shook her head with apparent concern. "It's lovely, but perhaps a bit too attention-seeking. You don't want to give the impression that you're trying to upstage other guests. Family events are about showing respect and understanding your place." Chelsea, worn down and already feeling insecure, found herself agreeing to a dress she hated, a conservative navy creation that made her look older, tired, and completely forgettable. As they left the boutique, she caught sight of herself in a mirror and barely recognized the dowdy woman staring back at her. The night of the charity gala, Chelsea stood in their bedroom feeling like she was wearing a costume designed to erase her identity. The navy dress hung loose and unflattering. Her hair was pulled back in a severe style that Sabrina had insisted was more sophisticated for mothers, and her makeup was so understated she looked washed out under their bathroom lights. "You look perfectly appropriate," Sabrina said approvingly as she entered wearing a stunning backless red dress that hugged her curves and made her look like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. Very dignified for a family gathering. When Damien appeared in his tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome, Chelsea waited for his usual compliments. For a spark of the man who used to tell her she was the most beautiful woman in any room. Instead, he barely glanced at her before checking his Rolex with obvious impatience. "Are we ready? We don't want to be late for Patricia's event." At the gala, Chelsea's worst nightmares materialized with surgical precision. The moment they walked into the ballroom, she understood she had been set up like a lamb led to slaughter. Every other woman there was dressed to kill. Gorgeous gowns, sparkling jewelry, perfect hair and makeup that screamed confidence and belonging. Chelsea looked like a dowdy chaperone who had wandered into the wrong party. "Chelsea, darling!" Patricia Harden approached with arms extended and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "How absolutely wonderful that you could join us tonight. You look so practical." The word practical was delivered like a diagnosis of terminal boredom, and Chelsea felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as every eye in their vicinity catalogued her fashion failures with barely concealed amusement. "Patricia, thank you so much for including us," Chelsea managed, trying to summon whatever dignity remained to her. "Well, Sabrina convinced us that you'd outgrown your unconventional phase," Patricia continued, her voice carrying clearly to nearby guests who pretended to examine their champagne while listening intently. "She assured us you'd learn to appreciate the importance of family traditions and appropriate behavior." "I've always appreciated," Chelsea began, but Patricia had already turned to embrace Damien with a genuine warmth that highlighted how coldly she'd greeted his wife. "My dear nephew, you look magnificent. Success suits you beautifully. And Sabrina, my goodness, you are absolutely stunning. That dress is perfection itself." Chelsea watched as Damien's family surrounded him with affection while she stood alone, an island of navy blue in a sea of sparkle, feeling invisible and unwanted in her own husband's world. When she tried to join conversations, topics immediately shifted to people she'd never met, places she'd never been, experiences that excluded her by design. "Remember the summer we spent in Martha's Vineyard?" someone would say, and suddenly everyone was reminiscing about exclusive vacations and private clubs, while Chelsea smiled politely and contributed nothing because she had nothing to contribute. The cruelest blow came during dinner. Chelsea found herself seated at the far end of the table, separated from her husband by a dozen other guests, while Sabrina was placed directly to Damien's right in the position traditionally reserved for the guest of honor. "Damien, we've missed you terribly at family gatherings," Patricia announced loudly enough for the entire table to hear and judge. "It's so wonderful to have you back where you truly belong, with people who understand your potential." "I've missed this too," Damien replied, and Chelsea felt something cold and final settle in her stomach at the genuine warmth in his voice. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to be around family who shares my values." "Perhaps now that you've established your household, you'll make more time for the people who've loved you since birth," Patricia continued, her eyes flicking toward Chelsea with barely concealed disdain. "Blood family should always come first, don't you agree?" "Absolutely," Damien said, raising his wineglass in a toast that felt like a betrayal. "To family loyalty." As the table echoed the toast, Chelsea sat frozen, a hand on her pregnant belly, watching her husband pledge allegiance to people who had spent 5 years trying to destroy their marriage. When had she and their children stopped being his real family? When had these people who had rejected him for marrying her suddenly become more important than the wife carrying his child? And across the table, Sabrina raised her glass, her green eyes meeting Chelsea's over the rim with a triumphant, venomous smile that promised this was only the beginning of Chelsea's humiliation, because the real destruction hadn't even started yet. Chapter 6. Birth and Betrayal. The moment Chelsea realized her marriage was truly over, she was holding her newborn daughter in a hospital room while her husband stood in the hallway choosing another woman over his family. The contractions started at dawn on a frozen February morning, exactly when the doctor had predicted and just 2 weeks before their 6th wedding anniversary. The pain was a sharp, insistent clenching deep in her back. Chelsea had been restless all night, her body preparing for the miracle she had been anticipating for 9 months, but when the first real wave of pain gripped her, she knew this would be the day their daughter would be born. "Damien," she called softly, shaking her husband's shoulder as another contraction built like a storm inside her body. "Damien, wake up. The baby's coming. We need to go to the hospital now." But instead of the excited rush to action she remembered from Chris and Derek's births, the memory of which now felt like a scene from a different life, Damien groaned and looked at his bedside clock with obvious annoyance. "Are you absolutely certain? It's barely 5 in the morning and you had false alarms last week." "This isn't false," Chelsea gasped, gripping his hand as pain radiated through her entire body, a pain so intense it stole her breath. "Our baby is coming today." It was Sabrina who appeared in their doorway like a perfectly groomed guardian angel, despite the early hour looking camera-ready in silk pajamas that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Is everything all right?" she asked, with the kind of calm competence that made Chelsea feel hysterical by comparison. "I heard voices and thought someone might need help." "Chelsea thinks she's in labor," Damien said, his tone suggesting this was more inconvenience than miracle, an interruption to his schedule. "How exciting!" Sabrina exclaimed, but her enthusiasm felt rehearsed rather than genuine. She glided into the room. "Don't worry, I can help. I've been through this with several friends, and sometimes these late pregnancy contractions aren't actually the beginning of labor." But Chelsea knew her body, knew the difference between practice contractions and the real thing, knew that her third child was determined to be born today, regardless of anyone else's schedule or preferences. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare wrapped in small talk. Sabrina insisted on coming along to help, sitting in the front passenger seat, chatting to Damien, while Chelsea labored in the back, trying to breathe through contractions that were coming faster and harder than they had with either of her sons. "This baby certainly has a sense of timing," Sabrina chatted brightly as Damien drove with maddening caution. "Though I suppose third babies often come quickly. You'll probably barely make it to the hospital before she arrives." "She?" Chelsea panted between contractions. "Oh, just a feeling I have. Call it intuition." Sabrina smiled at her in the rearview mirror, a smile that felt less like a prediction and more like a claim. At the hospital, everything happened with brutal efficiency. Chelsea was wheeled into a delivery room while Damien handled paperwork, and Sabrina made phone calls to notify the family of the blessed event. But as Chelsea's labor intensified, her husband seemed more concerned with managing logistics than supporting his wife through the birth of their child. "The family is so excited," Sabrina reported, appearing at Chelsea's bedside while Damien spoke with doctors in the hallway. "Patricia and Richard are already making plans to visit once the baby's settled. They want to make sure this grandchild knows her place in the Harden legacy." "Her place?" Chelsea whispered, confused by pain and medication. "Well, as the daughter of such an established family, she'll have certain expectations to live up to, certain standards of behavior and achievement. The family has such hopes for Damien's children." Another contraction hit like a freight train, and Chelsea forgot about Sabrina's strange comments as her body demanded all her attention for the work of bringing new life into the world. Kalia Rose Harden arrived at 2:17 p.m. after 6 hours of labor, weighing 6 pounds and 4 ounces with her father's warm brown eyes and her mother's delicate features. She was perfect in every way that mattered, a tiny miracle with rosebud lips and fingers so small they seemed impossible. "She's beautiful," Chelsea whispered, exhausted but filled with a fierce primal love as she cradled her daughter against her chest while tears of pure joy streamed down her face. "She's absolutely perfect." But the bed beside her remained empty. The chair beside the bed was vacant. Damien wasn't there for his daughter's first breath, her first cry, or the moment she opened her eyes to see the world that would shape her future. He was in the hospital corridor, taking what he called urgent business calls that apparently couldn't wait for his child to be born. "He's being very responsible," Sabrina said from the chair where Damien should have been sitting, her eyes fixed on the baby with an expression Chelsea couldn't quite read. It looked like ownership. "Making sure this little one will have every advantage, every opportunity. That's what good fathers do. They think beyond the moment to secure their children's futures." When Damien finally entered the room 3 hours after his daughter's birth, carrying flowers and apologies, something fundamental had shattered in Chelsea's heart. She looked at the man she had loved with everything in her soul and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I'm so sorry, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead with lips that felt cold against her skin. The calls were crucial for a deal that could secure our family's future. There was traffic and paperwork and— "You missed it," Chelsea said quietly, her voice empty of the joy that should have filled this moment. "You missed your daughter being born." "But I'm here now," Damien said, reaching for the baby with hands that trembled slightly. "Let me hold her. Let me meet my little girl." As Chelsea watched him cradle Kalia, whispering apologies and promises that felt hollow, she realized that the man who had painted nurseries and sang lullabies and sworn that family came before everything had been systematically replaced by someone who could miss his child's birth for a business opportunity. Over the following days in the hospital, a parade of hardened family members came to meet the new baby. But Chelsea quickly realized they weren't there to celebrate her or congratulate her on the birth. They came to assess Kalia, to welcome Damien's daughter into their legacy, to discuss the child's future as if Chelsea was merely the vessel who had delivered their newest heir. "She has the hardened eyes," Patricia cooed over the baby, barely acknowledging Chelsea's presence in the bed. "Strong genetics, good bone structure. She'll be beautiful when she grows up, assuming she's raised properly." "Damien must be so proud," Richard added, his attention focused entirely on his nephew. "3 children to carry on the family name. You've done your duty well." Duty. As if their children were obligations rather than miracles. As if Chelsea was a broodmare who had performed her function adequately rather than a mother who had just brought life into the world through hours of pain and effort. "Chelsea's been a dedicated mother," Sabrina said with that perfect smile, her hand resting possessively on Damien's arm. "So focused on the children and household management. It's wonderful when a woman understands her priorities and doesn't get distracted by outside ambitions." The implication was clear. Chelsea's role was to produce and raise children, while more important people made the decisions that actually mattered. When they finally brought Kalea home, Chelsea discovered that their house had been transformed during her hospital stay. Sabrina had helped by reorganizing everything according to what she called more efficient systems for a growing family. Chelsea's art studio, her sanctuary, had been converted into additional office space for family business. Her paintings, her easels, her supplies, all had been moved to a small cramped room upstairs that Sabrina referred to as a hobby corner. The nursery had been redecorated with colors and themes that Sabrina considered more appropriate for a hardened daughter. "I hope you don't mind the changes," Sabrina said sweetly, as Chelsea stood in the doorway of what used to be her creative soul. "I thought it would be easier for you to focus on the baby without all these art materials creating clutter and distraction." "This was my studio," Chelsea said quietly, her arms tightening around newborn Kalia. "Of course, and you can still paint upstairs whenever you have free time. It's just more practical this way, with 3 children needing so much attention. You understand." But Chelsea was beginning to understand far more than Sabrina realized. She was being systematically erased from her own life, her own home, her own marriage. Her art was being dismissed as a hobby, her role reduced to that of nursemaid and housekeeper, while Sabrina positioned herself as Damien's true partner in all matters of importance. The breaking point came 2 weeks after Kalea's birth. Chelsea was nursing the baby in her relocated hobby corner when she heard voices from the main floor. Damien, Sabrina, and several members of his family engaged in what sounded like a business meeting. "The question," Patricia's voice carried clearly up the stairs, "is whether Damien is ready to make the changes necessary to fulfill his potential and secure his children's futures. I believe he's finally starting to understand what truly matters," Sabrina replied with a confidence that made Chelsea's blood run cold. "It's taken time, but he's beginning to see that some choices made in youth might not serve him well in maturity. "Marriage is complicated," Richard's voice added, "especially when people marry for passion rather than compatibility. Sometimes wisdom means recognizing when a situation has outlived its usefulness." "The children deserve the best possible future," Patricia continued, "and that means parents who can provide not just love, but connections, opportunities, the right social environment for their development." Chelsea's heart stopped as she realized what she was hearing. They weren't discussing abstract business decisions. They were planning the end of her marriage and the future of her children as if she had no voice in either. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Damien's voice was quiet, uncertain. "We're suggesting that you consider what would be best for everyone involved," Patricia said gently. "You're still young, Damien. You have decades ahead of you to build the kind of life that would honor your family legacy and provide optimal opportunities for your children." "Sometimes," Sabrina added with a false kindness that made Chelsea want to scream, "the most loving thing parents can do is make difficult decisions for their children's long-term benefit." As Chelsea sat in her diminished corner, holding her 2-week-old daughter while listening to her husband's family plan their destruction, she finally understood the true scope of Sabrina's campaign. This wasn't just about seducing Damien, it was about replacing Chelsea entirely, taking her children, her home, her entire life, and presenting it all to Damien as a superior alternative to what they had built together. And the most devastating part was hearing the uncertainty in her husband's voice, knowing that the man who had once promised nothing could tear them apart was actually considering letting them do exactly that. Chapter 7. Darkness and Discovery. The day Chelsea Gray Harden was thrown out of paradise with 3 children and nothing but the clothes on their backs was the day she discovered that sometimes the end of everything is actually the beginning of who you were always meant to become. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a lawyer in a crisp suit who couldn't meet Chelsea's eyes as he handed her the documents that would legally end 6 years of marriage. She was feeding 6-week-old Kalia in the kitchen while Chris and Derek ate their breakfast, the domestic scene so normal, so full of life, that the legal papers felt like props from someone else's nightmare. "Mrs. Harden," the lawyer said quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, "I'm required to inform you that you have 30 days to vacate the premises. Mr. Harden has also frozen all joint accounts pending the settlement negotiations." Chelsea stared at the thick stack of papers with hands that shook so violently she could barely hold them. "Vacate? This is my home. This is my children's home." According to the filing, the house was purchased prior to marriage and remains Mr. Harden's sole property. There are also allegations about your fitness as a mother that will need to be addressed in family court. The words hit her like physical blows. Allegations about her fitness as a mother. After 6 years of devoted parenting, after sacrificing her own dreams to create the perfect family environment, after nursing her children through fevers and comforting them after nightmares, someone was questioning her ability to care for them. "What allegations?" she whispered, but the lawyer was already backing toward the door as if her desperation might be contagious. "You'll need to discuss that with your own legal representation, ma'am." "I'm sorry." After he left, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. Chelsea sat at the table, the papers spread before her, and read the complaint with growing horror. The woman described in these pages was a stranger, a gold digger, a social climber, a mother whose artistic pretensions interfered with her children's proper upbringing and whose postpartum instability made her a danger to their welfare. Every beautiful thing about their marriage had been twisted into evidence of her inadequacy, every moment of happiness reframed as her manipulation or failure. "Mama, why are you crying?" 4-year-old Chris appeared at her side, his serious brown eyes, so like his father's, filled with a concern that broke her heart into even smaller pieces. Did someone hurt you? No, sweetheart, Chelsea lied, pulling him close while trying to shield the legal papers from his view. Mama just needs to figure some things out. Where's Derek? Playing with his blocks in the living room. Mama, is Daddy coming home today? The innocent question was a knife to her chest. Damien had been staying at the office for the past 2 weeks, claiming that work demands required him to sleep in the executive suite. But Chelsea knew he was avoiding her, avoiding the conversation that would force him to look her in the eye while he destroyed their family. I don't know, baby. Why don't you go play with Derek while Mama makes some phone calls? Her first call was to a divorce attorney, a name given to her by a friend, who listened to her story with the weary patience of someone who had heard similar tales too many times. Mrs. Harden, I'll be honest with you, the attorney said. Your husband has significant advantages in this situation. He has superior legal representation, established financial resources, and what appears to be family support for his position. If he's willing to make character attacks against your parenting, this could become very ugly very quickly. But I'm a good mother. I've devoted my entire life to my children. I believe you. But family court isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's about who can present the most compelling narrative. And wealthy men with powerful families often have resources that struggling mothers simply can't match. The second call was to her bank, where she discovered that Damien had indeed frozen all their accounts. The woman who had helped them open their joint savings account 6 years earlier spoke in hushed tones of embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Harden. The accounts were frozen this morning by court order. There's nothing I can do until the legal issues are resolved. Chelsea hung up and stared at her wallet, which contained exactly $43 and a collection of credit cards that probably no longer worked. For the first time since Kalea's birth, the full scope of her situation became crystal clear. She had no money, no legal representation she could afford, no family wealth to fall back on, and a husband who was apparently willing to destroy her reputation to get rid of her. She was about to become a single mother of 3 with no resources and nowhere to go. That afternoon, Sabrina appeared in Chelsea's kitchen with tea and sympathy that felt more like mockery than comfort. I heard about the divorce papers, she said with false concern, settling at the kitchen table as if she belonged there more than Chelsea did. I want you to know how sorry I am that things have reached this point. Are you? Chelsea asked quietly, adjusting baby Kalea in her arms. Are you really sorry, or are you exactly where you planned to be from the moment you walked through our door? Sabrina's perfect mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the surface. I understand you're upset, but this situation isn't anyone's fault. Sometimes marriages simply run their course. 6 months ago, my marriage was perfect. My husband loved me, my children were happy, and our family was unbreakable. Then you arrived. Chelsea, I think your pregnancy hormones might be affecting your judgment. Perhaps it would be better if you focused on what's best for the children, rather than trying to blame others for problems that already existed. The dismissal was expertly delivered, suggesting that Chelsea was hormonally unstable while positioning Sabrina as the rational adult concerned for the children's welfare. What's best for my children is staying with their mother in their home. Is it, though? Sabrina's voice became gentle, almost therapeutic. The children have been so stressed by the tension in this house. Chris has been having nightmares. Derek has been clingy and anxious. Maybe they need stability more than they need. Well, more than they need things to stay the same. The words were poison wrapped in concern. Chelsea had noticed that Chris seemed more withdrawn lately, that Derek had been extra needy since Kalea's birth. But she had attributed it to normal sibling adjustment, not to some fundamental instability in their home environment. Where would we go? Chelsea asked, hating herself for even considering the question. I'm sure something can be worked out. Damien isn't heartless. He wants what's best for everyone. There might be a small settlement, enough for you to start fresh somewhere more suitable for your circumstances. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sabrina expertly planting suggestions about Chelsea's limitations, the children's needs, and the impossibility of fighting a legal battle she couldn't afford to win. By the time Sabrina left, Chelsea felt like she was drowning in inevitability. That evening, she began the heartbreaking process of packing their belongings. She had called her mother's older sister, the only family member who might help, and learned about the small house that had belonged to her grandmother, a tiny place in a working-class neighborhood that had been sitting empty since her grandmother's death. "You can stay there as long as you need," her aunt had said with the kindness of someone who understood desperation. "It's not much, but it's yours. Your grandmother always said it should go to family who needed it." As Chelsea folded tiny clothes and tried to decide which of their possessions they could take and which they would have to leave behind, she discovered something that changed everything. Hidden behind her grandmother's jewelry box in her mother's old room, she found a manila envelope with her name written in her mother's careful handwriting. Inside were documents, bank statements, and a letter that made her hands shake as she read it. "My dearest Chelsea," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my worst fears about your marriage have come true. I prayed that Damien's family would eventually accept you, but I suspected they would try to destroy you if they ever found the opportunity." The letter went on to explain that Chelsea's mother had quietly saved money throughout Chelsea's childhood, preparing for the possibility that her daughter might someday need financial independence. She had also kept her grandmother's jewelry, pieces that were worth far more than anyone realized. "The ruby necklace belonged to my grandmother, who survived the Depression by selling jewelry when times were desperate. The pearl earrings are antique, worth enough to give you a fresh start if you ever need one. I hid them because I knew that if Damien's family ever turned against you, they would try to take everything, including anything that might help you survive on your own." Chelsea's hands trembled as she opened the small velvet bags and saw jewelry that looked ordinary, but represented hope, security, the possibility of survival with dignity and tact. "My darling daughter, if the worst happens, remember this. You are stronger than you know, more talented than they will ever admit, and more worthy of love than anyone who tries to destroy you deserves to understand. Take care of those beautiful children. Build a life that makes you proud, and never let anyone convince you that you were not enough. You were always enough. They were just too small to see it." The letter was dated 3 months before her mother's death, written by a woman who had apparently seen the future with devastating clarity. Chelsea sat in her childhood bedroom, holding her sleeping daughter while her sons played quietly nearby, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope of someone who believed in fairy tale endings, but the fierce hope of a woman who had just discovered she had the tools to build her own future. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight of her life, not to save her marriage, which was already dead, but to save herself and her children from the people who thought they could erase her from existence. Chapter 8. Rising Phoenix. 20 years later, Chelsea Gray stood in her penthouse office, overlooking the city that had once rejected her, knowing that every person who had tried to destroy her was about to witness the most beautiful revenge of all, her absolute triumph. The magazine cover lay spread across her mahogany desk like a declaration of war won. Chelsea Gray, from struggling artist to fashion empire queen. The photograph showed her at 46, poised and powerful in a stunning emerald suit that complemented eyes that had learned to see opportunity where others saw impossibility. Beside her, a timeline chronicled 2 decades of building something extraordinary from nothing. "Mrs. Gray," her assistant's voice came through the intercom with barely contained excitement. "Forbes is on line 3. They want to discuss featuring you on their cover for the Most Powerful Women issue." Chelsea smiled as she looked out her floor-to-ceiling windows at the city sprawling below her. Somewhere out there, in boardrooms and country clubs, people who had once dismissed her as a nobody from nowhere were reading about her success and choking on their own arrogance. "Tell them I'll call back in an hour," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "I want to finish reviewing the fall collection first." The past 20 years had transformed her from a desperate single mother into one of the most powerful women in fashion, but the journey had been paved with struggles that would have broken weaker spirits. Those first months after leaving Damien's mansion had been a masterclass in survival. The small house her great-aunt had provided was a far cry from the luxury she had known. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table for 4. But it had been theirs, a sanctuary, and for the first time in months, Chelsea had been able to breathe without Sabrina's poison filling her lungs. Selling her mother's jewelry had provided enough money to hire a decent lawyer and establish basic security for the children. The ruby necklace alone had been worth more than her mother had indicated, enough to fund the legal battle that would ensure she kept primary custody of Chris, Derek, and baby Kalia. Damien's family had fought her with every weapon in their arsenal, painting her as an unfit mother, a gold digger, a woman too unstable to raise hardened children properly. But Chelsea had learned something crucial during those early court battles. She was far stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. "Your Honor," she had said during one particularly brutal hearing, holding 6-month-old Kalia while Chris and Derek sat bravely in the gallery, "these people claim I married for money, but they're trying to take my children from me. If I had been after wealth, wouldn't I fight to stay married rather than raise 3 children alone? The only thing I've ever wanted is to love and protect my family." The judge had seen through the Harden family's character assassination, awarding Chelsea primary custody with reasonable visitation rights for Damien, rights he had rarely exercised once the legal battle ended and Sabrina had claimed her prize. Starting her clothing business had been born from necessity and desperation. With 3 young children and limited resources, Chelsea needed work that could be done from home, using skills she actually possessed. She began by designing and sewing simple children's clothes, selling them at local markets and craft fairs. She remembered her first sale, a young mother who had lovingly stroked the soft fabric of a tiny dress she'd made, her eyes lighting up. The $10 she earned felt more valuable than any diamond Damien had ever given her. Her artistic eye, combined with practical experience dressing her own children, resulted in pieces that were both beautiful and functional. Clothes that looked expensive, but were affordable for working mothers who wanted their children to look special. "Mama, why do you work so much?" 7-year-old Chris had asked one evening, finding her at the kitchen table, surrounded by fabric scraps, designing patterns while Derek slept and baby Kalia napped in her bouncy seat. "Because we're building something amazing," Chelsea had replied, pulling him onto her lap to show him her sketches. "Someday, children all over the world will wear clothes that Mama designed. Isn't that exciting? Will we be rich like Daddy?" The question had broken her heart, but she answered honestly, "We'll be something better than rich, sweetheart. We'll be proud of what we built together." The business had grown slowly but steadily. Her designs caught the attention of a boutique owner who placed a small order, then a larger one, then introduced her to other retailers who were looking for something fresh and authentic in children's fashion. By the time Kalia was walking, Chelsea Gray designs had expanded into women's clothing, drawing inspiration from her own experiences as a working woman mother who needed to look professional on a tight budget. Her pieces were elegant but practical, sophisticated but accessible, exactly what real women needed. The breakthrough had come during Kalia's 3rd birthday party. A guest had admired Chelsea's dress so much that she asked who the designer was. When Chelsea admitted she had made it herself, the woman, who turned out to be a fashion buyer for a major department store chain, had asked to see more of her work. Chelsea remembered spreading her sketches out on her small living room floor, her heart pounding, as the buyer examined each one with a critical eye. "You have something special," the buyer had told her after reviewing Chelsea's portfolio. "You understand what women actually want to wear, not just what fashion magazines say they should want. That's rare in this industry." The department store contract had changed everything, providing the capital and exposure Chelsea needed to expand beyond her kitchen table operation. She had hired seamstresses, rented a proper workspace, and begun developing the business systems that would support real growth. "Look, Mama," 12-year-old Derek had called one day, pointing at a television commercial featuring a model wearing one of Chelsea's designs. "That's your dress on TV." "Our dress," Chelsea had corrected, pulling her son close. "We're all building this together." The children had grown up understanding that their mother's success was the result of hard work, determination, and refusing to accept other people's limitations. Chris had become serious and protective, often helping with younger Kalia while Chelsea worked late. Derek had inherited her artistic sensibilities, sketching designs and suggesting color combinations that sometimes ended up in her collections. Kalia had grown into a confident little girl who believed her mother could accomplish anything. By the time Kalia started school, Chelsea Gray Designs had become a nationally recognized brand. Chelsea herself had evolved from a desperate divorcee into a confident businesswoman who commanded respect in boardrooms and admiration from competitors. She had appeared on magazine covers, been featured in documentaries about women entrepreneurs, and spoken at conferences about building businesses from nothing. But the achievement that meant the most was simpler. She had raised 3 children who were proud of their mother and unashamed of their story. "Mrs. Gray," her assistant announced, "your children are here for lunch." Chelsea's face lit up as Chris, Derek and Kalia entered her office, no longer the frightened children who had left the Harden mansion 20 years ago, but confident adults who had grown up watching their mother build an empire through sheer determination. Chris, now 24, had followed his interest in business and served as Chelsea Gray Designs' chief operating officer. Derek, 22, had become the company's creative director, his artistic vision helping to keep the brand fresh and innovative. And Kalia, 20 years old and in college, spent her summers interning at the company that bore her mother's name. "Ready to celebrate?" Chris asked, embracing his mother with the same protective affection he had shown since childhood. "What are we celebrating today?" Chelsea laughed. "Besides the Forbes article, the Wall Street Journal feature, and the fact that you're about to open your 15th flagship store?" Derek grinned. "How about celebrating that you proved every single person who said you'd never amount to anything completely wrong? Or," Kalia added with a mischievous smile, "we could celebrate the fact that tomorrow's newspaper is going to feature a very different kind of article about the Harden family." Chelsea raised an eyebrow. "What kind of article?" "Let's just say," Chris said with satisfaction, "that karma has finally caught up with some people who thought they were untouchable. Apparently, trusting Sabrina Harden with business decisions wasn't the wisest choice Damien ever made." As they walked to lunch together, a successful woman and the children she had raised to be strong, kind and unashamed of their journey, Chelsea reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. She had lost a marriage, a mansion, and a life of luxury, but she had gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that she could survive anything and build something beautiful from the wreckage. Tomorrow would bring news that would complete the circle that had begun 20 years ago with divorce papers and a broken heart. But today, Chelsea Gray was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family she had fought to protect and the success she had earned through her own determination. Chapter 9. The Broken Man Returns. The day before her daughter's engagement party, Chelsea Gray thought she had seen every possible twist that life could offer. But she had never imagined that her greatest victory would be delivered by the broken shell of the man who had once thrown her away like garbage. The security guard's voice crackled through the intercom of Chelsea's penthouse with obvious discomfort. "Ma'am, there's an elderly gentleman here claiming to be Damien Harden. He says he needs to speak with you urgently. Should I call the police?" Chelsea's blood turned to ice in her veins as she looked around her living room, where Kalia sat in her wedding dress for a final fitting, radiant with the joy of a woman who had found real love with a man who worshipped her completely. Chris and Derek were reviewing tomorrow's party arrangements, their voices filled with excitement about celebrating their sister's engagement to Dr. Michael Chen, a brilliant surgeon who treated Kalia like the precious gift she was. "An elderly gentleman?" Chelsea repeated, her voice carefully controlled. "Did he provide identification?" "Yes, ma'am. It's definitely him, but he looks rough. Mrs. Gray, really rough. My security training says this could be some kind of scam, but the ID checks out." Chelsea's heart pounded as 20 years of carefully constructed protection threatened to crumble with 5 words. "Damien Harden wants to see her." "Mama!" Kalia's voice cut through her panic like a lifeline. "Who is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Chelsea murmured, then spoke more firmly into the intercom. "Send him up, but station 2 guards outside my door." "Chelsea, no!" Chris said immediately, rising from his chair with the protective instincts that had developed when he was 5 years old and watching his mother cry over divorce papers. "You don't owe him anything. You don't need to see him." "Actually, I think I do," Chelsea replied, surprising herself with her certainty. "After 20 years, I think I need to see what became of the man who chose his family's money over his children's love." Derek moved protectively closer to Kalia, who was staring at her mother with eyes that held questions she had never been allowed to ask. In 20 years, Chelsea had told her children the truth about their father, that he had chosen other priorities when they needed him most, but she had never spoken with bitterness or encouraged hatred. She had simply built a life so full and beautiful that his absence felt like a footnote rather than a tragedy. "Should we leave?" Kalia asked quietly, her hand instinctively moving to the engagement ring that symbolized the kind of love Chelsea had once believed in. "No," Chelsea said firmly. "You're adults now. You have every right to meet the man whose DNA you carry, if you want to. But remember, biology doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Protection does. Being present for every scraped knee and nightmare and triumph does." The knock on the door came sooner than expected, tentative and uncertain, rather than the confident demand for attention that Chelsea remembered from their marriage. When she opened it, she had to grip the doorframe to keep from gasping in shock. The man standing in her hallway bore almost no resemblance to the Damien Harden who had once commanded boardrooms and broken her heart. This version was thin to the point of gauntness, his expensive clothes hanging loose on a frame that had clearly shrunk with age and stress. His hair was completely grey and thinning, his face was etched with lines that spoke of years of worry and regret, and his eyes, those beautiful brown eyes she had once loved, were hollow with defeat. He looked far older than his 51 years, as if life had been extracting payment for his choices with compound interest. "Hello, Chelsea," he said quietly, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Damien," she replied neutrally, stepping back to allow him into the home she had built through her own efforts. "Please, come in." As he entered her penthouse, Chelsea watched him take in the evidence of her success. The original artwork on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city, the elegant furniture that spoke of wealth earned rather than inherited. His eyes lingered on the family photos that chronicled 20 years of achievements, celebrations, and love that had flourished in his absence. "My God," he whispered, stopping in front of a photograph showing Chelsea receiving a Businesswoman of the Year award, while Chris, Derek and Kalea applauded from the audience. "Look what you built. Look what you became." "What we became," Chelsea corrected, noting how he seemed to shrink even smaller in the presence of the children he had abandoned. "We built this together." Chris stood with his arms crossed, every inch of his 6-foot frame radiating protective tension. "So, you're our father," he said without warmth, "the one who couldn't be bothered to show up for birthdays, graduations, or any of the moments that actually mattered." Derek's artistic sensitivity made him more diplomatic, but no less pointed. "We turned out fine without you. Better than fine, actually." And Kalea, the daughter whose birth Damien had missed for a business call, simply stared at him with the detached curiosity she might show toward an exhibit in a museum. Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant to her actual life. "I know," Damien said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know I have no right to be here, no right to ask anything of any of you, but I had to see you. I had to tell you how sorry I am, and how proud I am of what you've accomplished." "Sorry?" Chris's voice could have cut glass. "You're sorry? You destroyed our mother, abandoned your children, and chose that woman over your family, and now you show up 20 years later with sorry?" "Chris," Chelsea said quietly, placing a gentle hand on her son's arm, "let him speak. Let him say whatever he came here to say." Damien's eyes filled with tears as he looked at each of his children in turn. The son who had grown into the man Damien had never been, the son whose artistic soul had flourished under his mother's nurturing, and the daughter who had become everything beautiful without ever knowing her father's voice. "Sabrina destroyed me," he said simply, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. "Everything I chose her over, my family, my integrity, my soul, she took it all and threw it away when she was done with me." "What happened?" Derek asked, his artistic empathy making him curious despite his anger. Damien sat heavily in the chair Chelsea indicated, looking like a man who hadn't been invited to sit comfortably in a long time. "She spent 15 years systematically draining every account, selling every asset, alienating every business relationship I had. When there was nothing left to take, she disappeared with her actual lover, a man she'd been seeing the entire time she lived in our house." "Our house," Kalea corrected sharply. "The house you threw us out of." "Yes," Damien acknowledged, accepting the correction like a blow he deserved. "The house I threw my family out of to make room for the woman who was planning to rob me blind. The house that's now owned by creditors, along with everything else I once had." "And your family?" Chelsea asked. "The family that was so important they were worth destroying your marriage for?" Damien's laugh was bitter and broken. "They disowned me the moment my money was gone. Turns out their love was as conditional as I made mine. Patricia, Richard, James, none of them return my calls. I'm an embarrassment they'd rather forget existed." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Damien's labored breathing and the distant hum of the city below. Chelsea studied the man she had once loved with everything in her, trying to find even a trace of the person who had swept her off her feet at that charity gala so many years ago. "Why are you here, Damien?" she asked finally. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm dying, Chelsea. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less. I came here because I needed to see what happened to the people I threw away. I needed to see if you were okay, if the children were okay, if somehow my greatest mistake led to something beautiful." He looked around the room again, at the successful woman and the remarkable children who had built a life without him. "And you are," he continued, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "You're all more than okay. You're extraordinary. You built something I never could have given you, a life based on real love, real work, real accomplishment. I threw you away, and you turned yourselves into diamonds. We had no choice, Chelsea said quietly. You made sure of that. I know, and I'm grateful. The words hung in the air like an unexpected gift. Grateful, not resentful, not demanding, not trying to claim credit for their success. Grateful. I came here to tell you that I was wrong about everything, Damien continued. I was wrong to choose my family's approval over your love. I was wrong to let Sabrina poison me against the best thing that ever happened to me. I was wrong to miss Kaylea's birth, to abandon Chris and Derek, to throw away a marriage that was perfect before I let other people tell me it wasn't good enough. He stood slowly, moving like a man in physical as well as emotional pain. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that every single day for 20 years, I've regretted the choice I made. Every single day I've wondered what our life would have been like if I'd been strong enough to tell my family to go to hell and chosen my wife and children instead. It would have been beautiful, Chelsea said simply, but it doesn't matter now. We built something beautiful anyway. I can see that, Damien replied. And I want you to know, I can forgive what I did to you because you survived it and became something amazing. But I will never forgive what I did to them. He looked at each of his children. I stole their father from them. I robbed them of birthdays and Christmas mornings and bedtime stories and all the moments that make childhood magical. That's unforgivable. You're right, Kalia said calmly, speaking for the first time since her initial shock. It is unforgivable. But we didn't need you. We had each other. And we had a mother who was worth 10 of you. The words were brutal in their honesty, but Damien nodded as if they were exactly what he deserved to hear. I know, he said, and I'm proud of you for knowing your own worth. I'm proud of all of you for becoming everything I never was. He moved toward the door, then turned back one final time. Chelsea, if you need anything, money for the wedding, help with anything at all, I still have a small insurance policy that could— No, Chelsea interrupted firmly. We don't need your money. We never did. What we needed was your love, your presence, your commitment to the family we built together. Since you couldn't give us that, we learned to give it to each other. I understand, Damien said. Then let me just say this. I hope Kaylea's marriage is everything ours could have been. I hope her husband loves her the way I should have loved you, completely, protectively, without conditions or reservations. I hope he never makes the mistakes I made. As the door closed behind him, the 4 people he had abandoned 20 years earlier stood together in the home they had built through love, determination, and refusing to let his betrayal define their worth. Tomorrow, Kaylea would marry a man who had already proven he would choose her over anyone or anything else in the world, and Damien Harden would disappear from their lives forever, carrying with him the knowledge that the greatest love story he had ever known was the one he had thrown away. Chapter 10. The Victory Speech. On the night of her daughter's engagement celebration, Chelsea Gray stood before 200 guests and delivered the speech that would define not just her triumph, but the triumph of every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. The ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel sparkled with the same elegance that had marked the charity gala where Chelsea first met Damien 26 years earlier, but this time she was the one commanding the room. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections across tables adorned with white roses and gold accents, while the city's most influential people raised their glasses in celebration of a love story that had captured everyone's hearts. Dr. Michael Chen held Kalea's hand with the reverence of a man who understood he was holding something precious beyond measure. At 28, he was already one of the city's most respected cardiac surgeons, But more importantly, he was the kind of man who had spent their entire courtship proving that Kalea would always be his first priority, his greatest love, his most treasured responsibility. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "please welcome the mother of our beautiful bride-to-be, businesswoman of the year, and founder of Chelsea Gray Designs, Mrs. Chelsea Gray." The applause was thunderous as Chelsea rose from her seat at the head table, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that she had designed herself, elegant, powerful, and absolutely unforgettable. But as she approached the microphone, her eyes caught sight of a figure sitting alone at a table in the very back of the ballroom. Damien had come. Despite everything that had transpired the day before, despite her clear dismissal, despite having no invitation or right to be there, he sat hunched in the shadows like a ghost, haunting the celebration of the family he had thrown away. His presence should have rattled her, should have stolen her composure on this most important night. Instead, it filled her with a calm certainty that this moment, this speech, would be the final word in a story that had begun with his betrayal and would end with her absolute victory. "Thank you," Chelsea said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate something beautiful. The engagement of my daughter Kalea to a man who loves her exactly the way she deserves to be loved." She paused, her eyes finding Kalea's radiant face, then Chris's proud smile, then Derek's encouraging nod, drawing strength from the family she had protected and nurtured through 20 years of struggle and triumph. "But before we toast to their future, I want to share something with all of you. I want to tell you a story about love, real love, the kind that builds rather than destroys, the kind that protects rather than abandons, the kind that chooses sacrifice over selfishness." The room had gone completely silent, sensing that they were about to hear something profound. 26 years ago, I was a struggling artist who believed in fairy tales. I met a man who swept me off my feet, who promised me forever, who made me believe that love could conquer anything. We built what I thought was a perfect life, a beautiful home, 3 incredible children, a marriage that seemed unshakable. Chelsea's voice remained steady, strong, free of the bitterness that might have been expected. But fairy tales, as many of you know, don't always end the way we hope. That man, that husband, that father, chose his family's money and approval over the family we had created together. He threw me and our 3 children out of our home to make room for someone he thought was better suited to his ambitions. Gasps rippled through the audience as people realized they were hearing the real story behind Chelsea Gray's rise to success. I stood in a courtroom 20 years ago, holding my 6-week-old daughter, watching lawyers try to prove I was unfit to raise my own children. I was called a gold digger, a social climber, a woman too unstable to provide a proper home for hardened children. Her eyes found Damien's across the room, noting how he had shrunk even smaller in his chair, his face wet with tears. The day that man threw me and my children out, I thought our lives were finished. People said a woman cannot survive without a man, cannot raise children alone, cannot build something meaningful from nothing. But I became both mother and father to my babies. I hid my tears so my children could smile. I went hungry so they could eat. I sold my mother's jewelry, the last connection to the woman who had loved me unconditionally, so they would never feel poor. The ballroom was completely silent now, every person hanging on her words. I raised them with dignity when the world turned its back on us. I worked 18-hour days building a business from our kitchen table while rocking a crying baby and helping with homework. I attended every school play, every soccer game, every moment of their lives that mattered, because I understood something their biological father never did. Being present isn't a burden, it's a privilege. Chelsea's voice grew stronger, more powerful, as she reached the heart of her message. And today, when I see my children standing tall, honorable and strong, I know my pain was not wasted. That man thought he destroyed me, but he only gave birth to my strength. He thought he ended my life, but he gave me a new beginning. From nothing, from less than nothing, I built a life, a name, a future, and a business that employs hundreds of people and serves millions of women who needed someone to understand their struggles. The applause began tentatively, then built to a crescendo as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. I can forgive what he did to me, Chelsea continued, her voice cutting through the applause, but I will never forgive what he did to my children. He stole their father from them. He robbed them of their childhood security, their right to unconditional paternal love, their chance to grow up believing that fathers stay and fight for their families. She turned to look directly at Chris, Derek and Kalia, her voice filled with fierce maternal pride. But look at them now. Chris, who became the man his father never was, loyal, honorable, protective of everyone he loves. Derek, whose artistic soul flourished because I taught him that creativity is strength, not weakness. And Kalia, my precious daughter, who grew up knowing that a woman's worth isn't determined by the man who chooses her, but by the strength she carries within herself. The emotion in the room was palpable as people wiped away tears and realized they were witnessing the conclusion of an epic story of survival and triumph. And to my daughter, as I see you ready to begin your new journey with Michael, my only wish is that your husband will give you the love, the respect, the devotion, and the absolute commitment you deserve. May your home always be filled with the happiness I once dreamed of but never received. May you never doubt, even for a moment, that you are his first priority, his greatest joy, his most precious responsibility. Michael Chen stepped forward and took Kalea's hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears as he nodded his promise to the woman who had raised the love of his life. But most importantly, Chelsea continued, her voice now carrying the power of a woman who had conquered every obstacle. To every woman listening, let my story be your strength. When life breaks you, rise higher. When the world calls you weak, show them your power. When someone tries to convince you that you're not enough, remember this moment and know that you are everything. The standing ovation began before she finished her sentence, 200 people rising to their feet in recognition of something larger than a simple success story. A woman is never weak. She is the courage of her children, the fire of her home, the heart of generations. Look at me. I was betrayed, abandoned, left in darkness with 3 babies and no resources. Yet here I stand, not broken, not begging, not bitter, but victorious. And if I can rise from nothing, every woman in this room can rise from anything. The applause was deafening now, but Chelsea wasn't finished. I built an empire from a broken heart. I raised 3 extraordinary humans from the ashes of a destroyed marriage. I turned my greatest pain into my greatest triumph. And I stand here tonight as living proof that the end of everything can be the beginning of everything better. She raised her champagne glass high, her voice carrying over the sustained applause. So tonight, we toast not just to Kalia and Michael's love, but to the power of women who refuse to be diminished, to mothers who protect their children at any cost, to survivors who turn their scars into strength, and to love stories that are written by the people brave enough to believe they deserve better. To rising from the ashes. To rising from the ashes. The room thundered in response. As Chelsea returned to her seat, amidst continued applause and a standing ovation that seemed to last forever, her eyes swept the room one final time. The table in the back corner was empty now. Damien was gone. He had heard the truth of what his choices had cost, had witnessed the absolute triumph of the woman and children he had abandoned, had seen the love and respect that surrounded the family he had thrown away. Unable to bear the weight of his own failures reflected in their success, he had fled into the night like the broken man he had become. Later, a waiter would mention seeing an elderly gentleman in the parking lot, sitting in his car with his head in his hands, sobbing with the kind of despair that comes from finally understanding the true cost of your mistakes. By the time hotel security checked on him, the car was gone, and Damien Harden disappeared from their lives forever. But inside the ballroom, Chelsea Gray was surrounded by love, celebration, and the sweet satisfaction of a victory that had taken 20 years to achieve. She had not just survived, she had triumphantly, spectacularly, absolutely won. Her children embraced her. Her future son-in-law kissed her cheek in grateful respect, and 200 people continued to applaud the speech that would be talked about for years as the perfect example of how grace, strength, and determination could transform even the most devastating betrayal into the most beautiful victory. The little girl who had once believed in fairy tales had finally gotten her happy ending, not through being rescued by a prince, but by becoming the queen of her own magnificent kingdom. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all.